Welcome back. So we will get started just about now with our responsible AI and teaching and learning lightning talk and discussion session. So we have an interesting mix of both some faculty fellows as well as some experts in AI education on campus for this session. And so I will welcome David Danks to kind of facilitate this session. He's another member of our external advisory committee, and he was a distinguished visitor earlier this year. And also, I guess he's also a professor at UCSD. Was going to be my also, I guess. So welcome, David Danks, and thank you for facilitating this.
Thanks so much, Penny. And my day job is to be a professor of data science, philosophy, and policy at the University of California, San Diego. My fun is I get to come here to Utah and talk to really smart people and learn about the amazing things that are happening. So it really is a pleasure to have been asked to moderate this panel. Like some of the others, we're going to do this with 7-minute lightning talks from our four amazing speakers from the University of Utah. And then there'll be a chance for questions. And I have some questions for them, but the far more interesting questions in my experience come from you in the audience. So consider yourselves put on notice that we'll be looking to you to have some amazing questions as well. So with that out of the way, we're going to be going for the lightning talks in the order that you're seeing up there, of course, with me not doing a talk. And so we're going to begin with Jim Agutter, apologies, who is an associate professor in the Division of Multidisciplinary Design and a senior associate dean for faculty success and academic innovation in the Office of Undergraduate Studies. So Jim, please take it away.
And there's that. I am going to use this because I can tend to go really long. So I'm being held to 7 minutes. So please this will be. And all my notes just disappeared. Okay. So as David indicated, my name is Jim Agutter. I was trained as an architect before I became an educator and went and studied medical informatics and other things. And the one thing that architecture teaches you is that design is never neutral. The intention that you put in, the window placement, how the doors are placed, creates an environment for individuals to move through the space and actually look at the world in a new way, potentially, or reinforce existing ways. Classrooms are no different. Their structures, the syllabus, the assignments, the technologies that we bring into the class shape how students encounter this knowledge. It is not neutral. Education has always been mediated through some technology, and increasingly by machines. The book, a technology. The chalkboard, another technology. The overhead projector, the clicker, the LMS, and many of us have seen that change. Each one of these tools frame the way that we teach and how students learned. But here's the shift. These earlier technologies and machines delivered, coordinated, and organized information. They extended the teacher's voice. They stored the syllabus, made knowledge easier to access. But AI is a little bit different. I think that's where our struggle is. It doesn't just deliver, it can actually participate along the way with the student and be a partner. It can be a friend. It can be a foe. It drafts, it rewrites, it generates, it simulates, we saw. And this leads us to a fundamental question. What kind of architecture of learning are we building when students learn with a machine that also participates? Big questions. So the philosopher Martin Heidegger, who has a complicated legacy, but in this particular case reminded us that technology is never just a tool. He used the term in framing. Every technology and machine, as we've discussed frames the learning in some way. The chalkboard framed the classroom as a space for one to many. The LMS framed learning as something trackable, modularized, standardized, distributable, all these great things. But Heidegger warned that modern technologies and machines don't frame, they in-frame. They don't simply add new tools to the classroom, they reconfigure the world of learning itself. In his words, technology can make us see everything as standing reserve, as resources to be extended, optimized, consumed, exploited. He also argues that this can happen with people, and so quite interesting. Think of a river. For centuries, a mill turned its flow into power in harmony with the flow of the river. It participated in the movement with the river and generated the amount of energy that was based on the flow of the water. But a hydroelectric dam doesn't do that. It reframes the river as a battery that we can turn on, off, we can summon, we can stop, which makes it much different. And so that's the danger of inframing. The shift is subtle, but profound. What once was a living force is now reduced to inventory. So, and once knowledge is reduced to standing reserve, the next step is almost inevitable. We begin to treat learning itself as consumption. We sit in a classroom and we consume. This is the risk of putting AI in education. The classroom becomes kind of a vending machine. You put in a prompt, you get an answer out. Knowledge is no longer something to dwell with, wrestle with, reflect upon. It becomes something to summon on demand. We pull out our phone. I need to get this answer for this quiz question while I'm sitting in a pub bar. It's a resource at ready, infinitely available, but stripped of the very struggle that makes learning meaningful. Students no longer wrestle with the ideas, they consume them. They summarize Plato. They generate an essay. They solve a problem set. And in our area, they put in a prompt to generate an image or a design. It's a different activity. It's efficient, it's polished, but it's empty, and it's really devoid of the learning and the depth. But as a designer, I see another possibility. Architects know that new technologies and materials don't just replace old ones, they expand what's possible. Glass didn't eliminate stone, it let us bring in light. Steel didn't replace wood, it allowed us to build higher. AI can be approached in the same way as a new material in the architecture of learning. The key is intentionality, which is the cornerstone of all design activities. Not a substitute, but a scaffold, supporting the learning's effort, not replacing it. Not just the product, but the process. Students show their prompts, their critiques, their revisions, and polished, not just the polished answer. And not the output, but the judgment, the act of human reflection, discernment, and meaning making. Let me just give you one quick example. I teach a large general education on design thinking, 125 students. We have designed it in a very studio sort of way where students wrestle with AI and actually do brainstorming. Brainstorming, as you know, and if you've taught this for a long time, people get about 10 to 15 ideas and then they stall out. Let's bring in AI to generate a whole bunch more and allow them then to look at those responses in deep, meaningful ways. AI is this new meaning, and we should design, and we should move towards something closer to a studio. A studio is built for construction. The space is open and flexible. Students work side by side, critique each other's ideas, and learn as much from the process as the product. In a studio, failure isn't a dead end, it's a design iteration. We're here, okay. So this points us into the direction that we should be delivering. And students construct this meaning when they wrestle with the ideas and connect to their own lives and negotiate them in dialogue with others. That construction process is messy, iterative, and deeply human, and no machine can do that for me. AI will be in a classroom. There's no question about that. The real question is, what will we choose to construct with it? What kind of architecture or learning will we leave behind for our students? Thanks.
Thanks so much for that, Jim, and really set the tone of what the stakes are. Because when we're dealing with education, we are dealing with not just one individual, but how are we reshaping the ways that the next generation is going to think about these technologies, think about the possibilities. I'm reminded of just finding out this morning that Google Chrome now has a plugin that interfaces with Canvas. So students just push a button and it automatically will ask Gemini to answer the homework question that is displayed on Canvas. So I guess I'm going to have to redesign some things in my classes. On that optimistic note, though, I'm delighted to introduce our second speaker, Chenglu Li, who is an assistant professor of educational psychology and the managing director of Alter, the Math of Learning Engineering Virtual Institute, and 1U RAI faculty fellow. So congratulations for that.
Yeah.
Please take it away.
Thank you so much. And I wish I'm not just right after Jim. Great, great talk. So I'm going to talk about responsible AI in education. My name is Chenglu Li. I'm an assistant professor at the Department of Educational Psychology at U. So I will mainly talk about my current project, Alter Math, which stands for AI Augmented Learning by Teaching to enhance and renovate math learning, which is a $10 million project funded by Human Futures, Gates Foundation, and Wharton Family Foundation. So what does Alter Math intends to address? Well, middle school math. But then why middle school math? Well, I guess we agree that middle school math is important because it serves as the gateway for other STEM subjects, which will also impact students' future career choice and ultimately the nation's workforce development. However, middle school math is challenging, and students often find it to be boring, not fun. And in the traditional classrooms, we have this kind of emphasis on rote memorization to talk about different formulas, equations to solve problems, but we don't really understand why we need them. What are their real world meanings? And this kind of challenge is also reflected in the national reports where we have less than a quarter of students achieve the proficiency of eighth graders math. And almost 40% of them are actually below basic level. So one potential way to solve this disengagement, lack of ownership, and the rote memorization is through learning by teaching. I guess we all have this kind of personal experience where we have peers coming to us to seek help. And then first of all, in order to help them, we need to first of all understand the solution, and then we need to be able to articulate the solution and our own thinking process, and potentially point them to some other practice problems to generalize, right? So during the process, we actually learn a lot. However, it is kind of challenging to have this high quality, scalable learning by teaching experience in the traditional classrooms. And there can also be some issues. For example, it's usually those high performing students that get to teach others. So with the advancements of generative AI, we have a chance to reimagine this learning by teaching experience, where we can flip students' role from students to the instructor to AI. And the punchline here is that instead of while we're trying to make AI a superior teacher, it is already an excellent student. And here is the architecture of our intervention. I'm not going to go too deep about that. But one thing I want to highlight is that we're adopting a multi-agent paradigm here. So we have a teachable agent. We also have a mentor agent to provide students with feedback, recommend them with learning resources. And we also do context engineering using an engagement agent as well as a knowledge agent so that we can provide sufficient information for the teachable agent and mentor agents. And here is the example interface of our AI tool. And feel free to scan the QR code if you want to see a demo. Okay, so AI teachable agent sounds fantastic, and hopefully it is, but there are always challenges. And one of the example challenge of responsible AI we have is hallucination. So on one hand, we definitely do not want the mentor agent to provide some false, inaccurate feedback to students. And on the other hand, the success of learning by teaching, using an AI teachable agent actually depends on whether the teachable agent can faithfully reflect what has been taught by the students. And we know that retrieval augmented generation, RAG, can be helpful here to mitigate hallucination. However, the traditional vector-based way of RAG requires global search, which is not efficient, and they do not account for relationships among documents, and that is not effective. So that is why we have investigated this knowledge graph approach to empower the AI teachable agents. And here is some of the experimental results that we have to evaluate our methods. So we compare our knowledge graph methods versus the traditional vector-based, as well as the pure baseline using pure prompts across different models. And we can see the knowledge graph approach can actually outperform others in terms of context accuracy, faithfulness, and answer relevancy. And we also bring the tool, the knowledge graph into classroom to test this with students. And we did see that the knowledge graph powered AI teachable agent tends to be help students with their learning outcomes. But what's more interesting here is that the low guidance paradigm tends to help students more. So what I mean by the low guidance here is that we still use the knowledge graph to retrieve context. However, how much information to incorporate in the final responses is actually determined by the AI itself. So basically using an LLM as a judge behind the scene. And this kind of flexibility allows us to generate like more engaging and natural responses for students. We also did a classroom study with over 200 students to test our AI tool and see how effective it is. So after controlling for their pre-test score, freelance status, time on task, we did see that using AutoMath tends to help students to learn better compared to the control group, which is doing business as usual. So we just wrapped up our year 2 for the project, where we have already reached over 60,000 students. And so we've all achieved all the milestones that we set for the first 2 years. And for next year, we intend to scale up the project to reach more than 120,000 students and conduct several rapid and large-scale A/B testing to further refine the products as well as to document our effects. So other than that, the AutoMath, I also do work in responsible AI. Specifically, I've developed a fair peer recommender system to more inclusively support students in an online math discussion forum, so that for their help seeking. I've also developed this using reinforcement learning to mitigate the bias in classification. And finally, using counterfactual role reversal as well as style control to make the responses from generative AI more responsible and safer. And thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And, good to see that there might be hope that we can use AI to make things a little bit better. It's not just causing headaches for all of us. Our next speaker will be Anna Marasovic, who is an assistant professor of computing and also a 1U RAI faculty fellow. So congratulations for that.
Thank you. All right, let's get started. Okay, so a lot of you in this room have recently, probably at least if you are at University of Utah, had a bunch of teaching related tasks that you had to do, from releasing your syllabus to preparing your lecture. If you're silly like me, preparing them again and not reusing them from the last year, uploading materials, and so on and so on. And if you are in College of Engineering, for example, you need to do all of these teaching tasks under 14 hours per week and balance them with your research, with your managing your research group and doing service and whatnot. So because there is a lot to do and a lot to juggle, it is often asserted that AI can help us with improving our time efficiency, quality of our materials, quality of our exams, improve our communications with students, help us manage our teaching assistants, and so on. However, when we look what happens in practice, the reality is that faculty members are very often excluded, together with graduate students who are teaching assistants and undergraduate students who are directly impacted by our teaching. We are collectively excluded from design and use of tools in education. So although what I work on is much different from finding applications in education, I'm super interested in actually understanding what the needs of faculty in higher education are, and how we, my community, which is LLM community, people who build and evaluate LLMs, what should we actually develop and bring back to this community that I'm now also part of since I become a professor. So to answer what those needs are, we have started this very, very new study that is still under development in terms of what we want to do. But this is one idea of how we can approach finding what those needs of faculty are and how to match them with what can happen right now by AI community and what we envision we can develop in the future. So first step in this approach we would take is to find some faculty who would like to participate in our study, and then have them describe some of their teaching workflows. For example, I can say, okay, for grading this assignment, these are all the steps I needed to do. And then we can discuss which one of these steps I would like to actually be automated by a tool, like an AI tool. I also need to externalize what are my desired outcomes from this tool. What do I want from it? And this will help frame the criteria for developers of AI. Like, what do they need to develop? What kind of requirements this tool needs to satisfy. After that, we would design so-called AI probes, which are these half-baked ideas that will help us visualize to faculty what kind of things are out there. Now, this has become somewhat easier to do nowadays because all of you have played around with ChatGPT, so you have some mental model of, all right, there is this AI tool and what it can do together with some others. But there is always new development. So for example, when I demo my agents that actually browse the web and on their own click things on the web pages, open, close things, I still see a level of excitement and oh my God, that's kind of new. I haven't seen that before. So there is always something that maybe generally isn't so super commonly known as the AI community is aware of. So basically here we would build some of these half-baked ideas, which are not actual products, and we would have Wizard of Oz simulations, but it would help faculty, especially faculty who are not in the engineering college, to kind of get a better overview of what's going on in the field, like what's possible. Here, it is super important to already start to implement these responsible AI considerations. So yesterday at the welcome reception, we have a nice conversation, and I have heard how environmental impact of LLMs is something that students are concerned about. And then, of course, this is something you as an educator should also be concerned about and have not a dismissive response to your student, but actually kind of see what to do about that. You can't force them, I think, to use the largest LLM there is if that's what is not aligned with the values of your student in their daily work. So here, for example, in this particular situation, we can hear that from a faculty member that that's their concern, and we can start to propose, all right, these are the things you should be aware of. There is a smaller LLM. There are open LLMs. So you can actually put an LLM on device if you don't need the best reasoning model, but you need something for assignment, which is often sufficient. It's often sufficient to have a smaller one rather than larger one. And these are the things that I can hear from conversation people aren't super aware of, that you can actually have your smaller LLM on CHPC compute, you know where the data center is, you have more information that your students can then receive to address some of their concerns about the environmental factors and the land use. When faculty members who participate in this have a better understanding and overview of everything that's possible and various alternatives that can address some of the responsible AI concerns they have, then we can start to have an actual brainstorming stage where both the faculty member and an AI researcher co-design the suite of tasks that can then then I can bring, for example, to my community and say, these are the kinds of tasks that educators actually need us to develop and have high performance on. And these are their criteria for how we should evaluate this technology and be sure that it is actually meeting their needs. So here at the end, I said, this is the outcome, but I should have, if I had a little bit more time, enrich this slide by saying that we should also complement with this list of things educators don't want. So for example, I know that maybe someone will propose, okay, how about having a camera in the classroom and checking whether your students are paying attention? I wouldn't be down with that. I don't want to surveil my students. So there is always going to be a list of things that has a potential benefit. It's feasible to actually develop, but that a large collection of faculty may say this is actually not something we want and is not best use, thing to be developing by the AI community. So yeah, that's something we want to do. It's still very much under development. So if you have any additional feedback, I am super happy to hear it. Thank you so much.
Thanks for that, Anna. And on behalf of professors everywhere, yes, please. I don't know where that voice came from. I didn't hear anything. I'm delighted to have our final speaker of the Lightning Talks, John Thomas, who is the Director of Digital Learning Technologies here at the University of Utah. So John, please.
Okay, I'd like to just start out kind of talking what I do in my day-to-day job here at the university. I'm the Director of Digital Learning Technologies, and we oversee the technologies used in teaching and learning, as the name kind of explains. And what that means day to day is that there are a lot of companies that come and say, hey, we want to show you our latest demo of AI that we put into the tool. And so we have to kind of understand, as we look at all these different demos that come in, how do we determine what is useful and what's not going to be useful? What is going to be valuable in this new AI-infused environment? And as I thought about that question, I've gone back to the conceptual framework of sociocultural theory, and in particular, the zone of proximal development. Zone of proximal development introduced by Vygotsky and later built upon by Leontev and Luria, really helps me to understand kind of the value of these tools. And if you don't, I'll give a brief introduction to this really quickly. What ZPD, or Zone of Proximal Development, says is that there's a spectrum. Their students have things that they cannot do, the learner cannot do, all the way to things that they can do completely by themselves. But there's this very important liminal space that this learner goes through. And the real insight that Vygotsky brought up is that this is primarily a space of social, cultural, historical contexts. And so there is a space where the learner can do things with assistance. And the way that Vygotsky described it is by help from a more knowledgeable peer, is the way that it was described. And initially, a lot of this research was on child development, but it's been applied in several different contexts and has been very influential and in the educational psychology sphere. And so as we look at that, ZPD, I want to compare that to where the predominant model that we've used in instructional design for so long, which has been backwards design, where you start with the learning objectives, and then you say, what's the assessment that's going to measure that learning objective? And then what are the activities that we're going to do? And then what's the content or lecture that we're going to bring in? And that is kind of interesting if you compare that with the zone of proximal development. Oh, I just want to point out the way that my former boss and mentor would say that is, what artifact would convince me that the student has learned? I think that is a very important question. I'll come back to that. But because that's been our question, we've operated primarily at the bottom circle here, where we've said, what can the learner do by themselves? This is where I'm going to assess. This is where I'm going to target. I'm going to put my quizzes, tests. We're going to do all this other stuff, but we're going to get to this bottom sphere. And this is where we're going to focus all our attention. And that becomes a little bit problematic with AI because, as we know, AI is very good at doing most of that stuff. And now we have a Google plugin or a Chrome plugin that can do that for us, right? And so this liminal space becomes very important. Now, it's always been important, and I do want to acknowledge there's always been work in this area to try to measure in the zone of proximal development what is happening. And it is often very resource intensive. So we have group work, we have reflections, dynamic testing is probably the one that I'm talking about most when we're talking about resource intensive, used in heavily in special ed, where we're saying, we're going to sit down with a student and see what they can do without help, and then measure that. And we can do time trial, we can do tracking over time and see how they do better. Mentorship reviews, another one. This has always been done here. But if we start to think about another circle there, right? If we start to think about, okay, what can the learner do with AI assistance? It starts to problematize that space, right? And we start to understand there's still going to be, at the end of the day, we hope that there still be a human in the loop, a learner that can be that more knowledgeable peer. But what can happen with that AI assistant? And what can we do to help the student through that space? You can begin to envision how a student can get help through that AI assistant and be able to meet. And not only that, that we can begin to track some of what's happening a lot better. I've been working with Jim Gutter a little bit and have been really impressed by his thoughts around a tool he's building, UBot, that is doing exactly that, where the data that the students are asking is being tracked and being fed back so that we can have this kind of experience of being able to have that tracking data, which previously has been so difficult to hold on to, or gather, I should say. So here we go. So we have some instructional tools with AI in mind, and we start with what Anna was kind of talking about, where we're going to make this easier for the teacher. We're going to have, and these, I should have said, these are examples that Instructure Canvas is launching. They announced this at InstructureCon. So we have smart search, we have rubric tools, we have discussion summaries that are going to make things so much easier. We have translation tools coming out and make it really easy to do content creation. But that is really at this point replicating the bottom part there, right? It's really replicating what we've been doing for so long. What AI can start to do is go into that zone of proximal development, and we can look at opportunities to use AI at different levels. I've heard some claiming, oh, you know, the idea of having to block AI, that's terrible, don't do that. But we ought to be using that strategically. We ought to be saying, at some points, we want the student to use this much AI. And if our learning objectives is over here, that we may want to limit it totally. We ought to use the tools to help us do that. And so some of the tools you see coming out, including proctoring tools, or even if you're looking at the writing inside a frame and tracking that, do that. They limit the tools down to what we want to measure, and so that we can measure in that zone of proximal development space. And then finally, let's see. And then also the idea of using it for students to obtain the foundational knowledge, certainly have been covered by many people, but very important so that students now have that personalized tutor experience that can guide them through that space. And the last point I wanted to make is the idea of turning AI on its head, which is such a powerful example of AI. The interesting thing about AI is that it can help students learn, but it also changes the context that we're trying to teach students about. For example, in a discipline, I previously worked as a programmer, computer science, and you think about how the field of computer science is changing even as we're developing these materials to help students learn with AI. So turning AI on its head, the questions, the prompts, how could my students use OpenAI ChatGPT to accomplish a certain learning objective we're going through? What artifact could they produce that would demonstrate that learning objective, going back to David Wiley's comment about saying what artifact could they produce, I think is one way that we can start using the ZPD, zone of proximal development, and starting to build in these tools into our teaching and learning. Thank you.
Thanks so much, John. And it's, you know, I am of an age that I remember the panic about graphing calculators, that this was going to be the end of math education and people in my generation would never be able to do it. And then when my daughter was in 5th grade and they mandated that we get her a graphing calculator, and I was like, this is all wrong. And then I realized, no, teachers are really smart and they'd figured out how to do it. And it's so exciting to see the things that are happening here at the U in terms of learning how to teach with AI and in environments that are really becoming suffused with it in all that we do. So as I warned at the beginning, we'd love to have questions from the audience, but I'm going to exert moderator's privilege to ask a first question for the full panel. I'd love to hear from each of the 4 of you. And that is a question I get a lot, which is, what keeps you up at night when it comes to AI in education and learning? And it could be it keeps you up at night because it's so exciting and you just want to make it happen. It could be that it keeps you up at night because you're terrified about what's coming or what's already here. But what is the one or maybe more things that you just think, this is the crux of it. This is the piece. Anna, maybe I'll put you on the spot and start, and we'll just walk down the aisle, and then please feel free to get up to the microphones to ask your questions.
Nothing is, I sleep so well, which is true. But yeah, I think my answer is going to be a little bit broader just because I work in the LLM space. I think one thing that kind of maybe induces some level of whoa inside me in a negative way is seeing and all these examples in the past that have been repeated today again, like .com, housing, social media, and retrospectively scientists looking back and being like, wow, I was a part of any of this. I don't want to be part of something that like 10 years from now, I think, wow, this was just a complete waste of time for people. And it had produced so much negative stuff in our society and we can't get rid of it. I like social media. Maybe this is a very negative stance to the social media, but that's my opinion. So that's broader answer in general LLM, but then it applies to education as well.
John?
I think maybe it's somewhat similar, but just the understanding of the uphill battle that we have in terms of the forces that are currently driving AI that are largely driven by money. And I did take a lot of comfort in the presentations earlier today. I mean, it was really wonderful to hear the response that Utah is making to that and the efforts there. But it is, as I think, somewhat of an uphill battle because of money is power, and there is so much on that side of the equation. So,
Well, for me, I guess there are both excitement and terror. So on one hand, it's great to see that we somehow really get some agency from nowadays AI. Previously for educational research on AI in education, they're mostly doing this kind of single purpose AI systems. For example, dropout prediction, behavior classification, course grade prediction, which usually function in a very isolated manner. But learning is inherently complex, and there's no one-size-fits-all approach that will just address that. So we would need a holistic and integrated AI system here. And that's where this agentic AI that we have nowadays comes into play, right? So which can orchestrate with different external tools, models, do the planning, execute them, and so on. So, but on the other hand, with I think lots of the panelists already talk about that. With the advancement of generative AI, it has been never easier for students to get the answers. And I'm not talking about like good or bad answers. I'm talking about answers they can use and submit with their homework. But then learning is not about retrieving answers, right? It's about developing their critical thinking, exploring solutions, struggling productively. So in a way, we need this weak LLM in education. And by weak, I'm not talking about like the model's capabilities weak, but weak in a way that's intentionally promotes this kind of productive struggle for students so that they can deepen their conceptual understanding during learning.
Yeah, and your mention of agents, I confess, when John put up this slide, I thought, oh, a lot of those are things that agentic AI could do. And then I thought, And then the students are going to have agentic AI. And then, we can all just go ski because the agents will talk to each other and that'll be the learning. We'll do a grade that way. Jim?
Yeah. I live in two worlds. One is like unbelievably excited for the possibility of using AI in education, as being a horrible, absolutely horrible student forever because I thought a little bit differently. This creates an opportunity for hyper personalization, for knowledge, which is like, oh my gosh, we have been dumping information based on my limited viewpoint. For me, in a classroom, and students are saying like, I don't connect with this dude. What you're telling me doesn't resonate with me. And now we have some tools that can open that door up to be based on how you learn and how you think. Unbelievable what that could do for the world. At the same time, living in the sort of past and the terror of really loving doing hand drawing, what are we losing by doing that? I don't know. And it's sort of this interesting thing. Like, yes, have we always evolved with our brains? And do our children who engage in this activity think radically different? And it's like, yeah, they do. And that's great. But I don't quite get it, which is kind of terrifying. And I don't want to be the old guy yelling at kids, telling them, you don't do it the way we did it. But I think there's an inherent tension in that, that we're wrestling with and not really knowing. Like, I transitioned in architecture between hand drawing and digital drawing, and it was quite an abrupt change. And we kind of saw where it was going. Like, okay, well, it's just gonna get simpler to draw, and I can see the destination. This, like, you all may be smarter than me. I have no clue what the destination of this is. And without sort of benevolence at its core and very thoughtful consideration and policies and structures, it is driven, as John said, by profit, and that's terrifying.
So again, I'd like to invite people to make their way up to the microphones. I'll take people as they come to the microphone just to make sure everyone in the room can hear the question, and I'll vamp just a little bit longer. And please go ahead.
So hope you don't mind, but I have a comment before my question. Is that what?
Is it a short comment?
It's a very short comment. So I have a 7-year-old daughter, and what gives me sleepless nights is an AI trainer that fails on its guardrails.
Which they all do, right? I mean, the guardrails are never perfect. And
I'm an AI architect. I been building enterprise IT solutions for like 30 years now, and exceptions do occur. Despite good intentions, exceptions do occur. So that's my that's what gives me sleep at night. Sorry for the comment here. So the question is for you essentially is that you put up that beautiful drawing with the agentic AI and students. So there are like 4 aspects to it. There are agents, there are students, there are teachers, and there's a subject. So my question to you is, if you can drill down on the solution aspect, is that do you envision AI agents as subject matter experts talking to students, or do you envision AI agents as companion to students talking to agents, or some other combination of that?
Well, I guess that relates to what John just described about the zone of proximal development. So when we have this mentor agents, the goal is to actually build this more knowledgeable other for students. And to answer your question in a very short sentence, is basically our goal with the mentor agents that is there to facilitate students. It's never there to lead, to direct the learning of students. And the mentor agent will only jump in when the students actually are struggling. And that's where the engagement agent we're doing to provide the context on whether students are showing off-task behavior, what kind of tutoring strategies they're using to teach the teachable agents, and also whether they're showing any signs of success of tutoring during the conversation. And we are seeing red flags using this kind of context engineering. Then we will determine whether mentor agents should be jumping in and what kind of resources the mentor agents should be recommending with.
Thank you.
Great, Jeff.
Yeah, great talks. So I was really kind of thinking about the Venn diagram you had up in the last talk with the proximal zone. And so you had nested the things students could do with the help of a knowledgeable peer inside what they could do with AI. And my thought of it was that those two are not necessarily nested, and that there's something you can help a student do better that maybe you can't do with AI, and maybe say not yet, but I think this will continue to be the case, that there's some parts better that a teacher can do and some parts better they can do with an AI. Where, like, do you disagree with me, or where do you think those are? How will we navigate this? Where to kind of put AI in the learning part, and where are we going to need to keep the instructors as a core part of this?
And if I can add to that, I'd also love to hear that, because I was thinking that, Chinglu, when you were just responding to the previous question, what's left for the teacher? If the students are learning through self-teaching, you disappeared the teacher in your talk, but hopefully we teachers aren't going away. So I'd love to hear from both of you, sort of what's the role for teachers in these models? John, go ahead.
Yeah, I think there is, I think there will always be a need for a teacher, right? I mean, that's the idea of human in the loop that we keep talking about. And part of it is a choice that Margaret talked about. Like, I think that is a choice we have to make and say, we don't actually want to wholesale offload this to AI. I think that's a choice we make, right? And I think it's also necessary because there are certain things that you cannot teach. And I do not believe that you'll ever be able to teach. And maybe that's not even desirable if you could, okay? So I would say, no, I think there's always the need for the teacher. It is talking about what part is owned by the AI and what can we offload and what we don't desire to.
In your perspective, what are these examples that we need the teacher, that we don't think the AI is going to be the right solution?
So I'm going to come back to that in just a second, but I just want to do an analogy. We have all the music in the world, but we still go to concerts, right? Why do we go to concerts? For the experience. And I think that is what the teacher becomes, the owner of the experience of learning and the kind of orchestrator of that.
Yeah, so in our example, teacher, I definitely agree with John. So basically, we will always be needing teachers. And for the case of learning by teaching, there are usually actually three stages: the preparation stage, the learning by teaching stage, and the evaluation stage. So in order to actually be able to teach someone, you need to have some foundational knowledge first. It's not like where I know nothing about a topic, I'm just going to talk nonsense to my students. So that's the role of teachers, to basically prepare students with the essential knowledge first. And then also during the teaching, learning by teaching, there will always be different challenges, diverse personal needs from students that the teachers can help identify, and also probably aggregate that as a classroom, and to talk address all of them all together.
Can I add something real
Sure.
quick, please? The other thing that I would say is we are, as humans, more than this. And if we only reduce knowledge and insight and other things to our brain, then yeah, AI can do it much better. It is a faster, bigger brain. But we as a species are more. And we can, and so the experience that other human beings have together is much, much deeper than sitting there with your computer, even if it gives you the right answer. It's like, it is a different critter because we are full embodied species that interact and that are socially constructed to engage with each other, not just here.
Just because knowledge has been mentioned quite a lot, I want to emphasize that education is not just about knowledge and learning knowledge, but also about making your students good citizens of the society. When I think about my 5 years of math education, I
use some of it, but I don't use most of it, although I have learned it. What I gained is this critical thinking part of it, but also how to be organized and how how to show up to things and all of that, which I think to some extent an AI agent can support, but a human connection there is crucial.
But so much harder to measure. And so, of course, as you have the quantification of education that has occurred over the last, well, decades on end, it feeds into the AI. All right, just making sure we have time because I don't want to make Penny angry with me. So
I'll be brief. So mainly for Chenglu. So a lot of the issues around responsible AI have to do with generative AI, have to do with how reliable we can make that technology to avoid hallucinations and whatnot. I think sorry. Yeah. Part of the problem with generative AI is trying to make it more reliable to reduce hallucinations and things like that. And one of the things I think is interesting about your research is how in the educational context, you sort of invert the roles in a lot of ways, remove those kinds of issues as problems for interacting with AI. And I'm interested in if that's affected the way you think about AI more generally and how people and responsible AI. Thanks.
Well, great question. So, in fact, so even though we try to flip the role of AI, so it's not instructor anymore, it's more like a student. Hallucination is still like a big issue in our case. So on one hand, we have the teachable agent, right? So we ask students to teach the AI students, but then how do we actually reflect whatever the students are teaching them? And what is the base knowledge for the AI students, right? How do we actually simulate realistically about what a middle school students would ask in the learning by teaching sessions? And on the other hand, we also have a mentor agent to serve as the more knowledgeable other. And then there can still be chances where the mentor agents are providing false, not super helpful feedback for students. And how do you ensure that the feedback is actually effective and targeting students' zone of proximal development?
So I'm going to just exert moderator privilege and say we've got time for one more very quick question.
Thank you. I appreciate the time. Danae Hayes from the College of Science. Over the years, in higher education, I think that we've seen a swing in terms of the students being fully beholden to the professors in terms of grading and graduating and their experience. And I think that swung a little bit with student evaluations of the professors and higher ed being a big business and needing to draw in students and have those students' evaluations. How do you balance AI to create an experience where the students are coming out of higher education with the tools and skills that they need to become effective in the workplace, as well as providing them an experience that draws them in and increases attendance and enrollment?
I maybe have a different view to push back on. I could care less about attendance and enrollment, quite honestly. I think the idea that humans exert their autonomy to learn what works best for them is like magic. I think we've existed for a very long time in exerting control, and that control then causes individuals to behave in certain ways. And when they deviate from that, we kind of freak out. Like, well, you didn't attend. And it's like, well, yeah, you're kind of boring. Like, I mean, honestly, it's like I got better things to do. Right. Sorry, me. I see the dwindling nature of my class. And it's like, great. You are adults. Welcome to adulthood, where you make decisions based on your future. And I can guide, I can encourage, I can sort of create an environment that's I feel is engaging, but it may not be for most people. And I hope that they can get the material out that they need for their complicated lives and their particular situation. And for me, if an individual walks out of the class with slightly bit more confidence in their ability to critically think and engage and do something meaningful in their life, winner, winner, chicken dinner. Like, I've done my job. If they walk out and they're really frustrated because of something and they're just kind of surly, and it's like, okay, well, you know, I tried. So I have a different view.
Well, but I do think, just to make one last comment before I get dragged off the stage. I mean, I think that we do need to recognize that AI is not going to solve the longstanding tension, which is students, sorry, but people in general often don't like to learn. It's hard. It's not always pleasant. And there's, lots of empirical data that there's an inverse correlation between the amount that students learn and how they rate the class. I mean, this has been longstanding, and AI is not going to change that, right? We see this happening with large language models now, where they've become, in some cases, overly sycophantic. It's like, oh yes, you're a genius. 2 + 2 does equal 5. And you're like, no, you need to push back. And I do think that that's a concern that we all need to be aware of, is that AI is not going to make learning necessarily easy, or fun. What we need to think about is, how do we have learning be learning the right things, where right is meant in many senses of the term. So obviously these are conversations that are not going to end. And it's, I will say, as somebody who's not here at the University of Utah, truly inspiring to see the questions that are coming, to see the work that's happening. These are challenges that we are all wrestling with in academia and outside of it. And it's really a pleasure to have gotten to hear from all of you and to have all of you here with us today. So I believe we have a short break, and then we pick back up in 3 minutes.